Hi everyone, Titus here for part 2 of our Pong mini-series where we recreate the classic arcade game in Unreal Engine. In the last video we created the paddles for player 1 and player 2, and in this one we'll work on creating the Pong ball so we can bounce it back and forth. Let's not waste any time and just jump right into it. Alright, so first thing we need to do is we're going to right click and create a new blueprint class. We're going to choose a type actor. And then we got to give it a name. Let's do BP underscore ball. And we can double click to open that up. And then I think the classic pawn ball was a little square. So we're working in 3D, so let's just add a cube. And we'll just call it ball. And what we can do is just drag this up to replace the default scene root. So it's the primary root component. And then the other component we need to add is we're going to be handling the movement using a script, and Unreal Engine comes with some scripts built in, one of which is called Projectile Movement. So it's great for, like grenades or bullets, what have you. So we'll add this in here, and then we can make some initial values. So the initial speed, or the spawning speed, I can do 1,000 units. I'll leave the max speed at 0, so it's unlimited, or it can basically accelerate to whatever value you want. The gravity scale, I'm going to set to 0 because I don't want the ball to basically change on the Z axis. And then I'm going to enable should bounce. The bounciness I'm going to set to 1, so it is true. The friction I'll set to 0, so it's basically gliding across. And then I think that is going to be it on the projectile movement settings. If we go back to the ball object, there is a material slot. So if I don't do anything and I go back to the scene and just drag in the ball, and then I reset the world origin, and then I play the scene, you can't see the ball, and it's because it's too dark. So it doesn't have this emissive material that we created in the previous video. So we can highlight that, go back over and hit the little arrow to load it in, or you can hit the drop down and just search for that material. Now when we go back and we hit play, you'll notice that the Pong ball object basically will transition out based on that projectile movement script, which works pretty good. If you want to adjust the movement, it should be down here under velocity. Currently right now it has a value of 1 in the X, so it's moving along its X axis. That's why it's traveling up. But you can adjust it in the Y or the Z, what have you. I think what we'll do is we'll leave the velocity in the X value for now, and we will just randomly rotate the object in the construction script. So if you come to the construction script tab here, I can then drag in my static mesh, which is the ball, which is also the parent, or I'm sorry, the root component. So all the other components, well, currently it's just the one, but if you add more, it'll follow this one. And we can drag in a set world rotation. And we'll hook this up over here. And then I really only need to change the Z axis. I don't need the X and the Y, so I can right click and split the structure pin. And then I can drag off the Z, and we'll do maybe a random float in a range. And maybe the angles that I use, I can probably do -130 by 130. And then if I compile, save, and hit play, you'll see the ball will actually transition out at some random angle, either left or right. I think that'll work just fine. Now let's delete the BP ball object from our scene, because we're actually going to spawn it through a game manager, but for now we're going to spawn it from the player just through some test code. So we can go back to the BP underscore player that we created in the previous video. We'll find an empty spot in our event graph, and let's create a keyboard event. So you just type keyboard, and then you can do some key. It doesn't really matter. This is just test code. It's not going to stay. So in my case, I'm going to do spacebar. And I'm going to press C to comment this out and just call this test code so I don't forget. And then maybe I'll give it a color. Okay, so when I push the spacebar, I want to spawn an actor from a class. The actor I'm going to do is BP underscore ball. And I won't be able to compile this because it has no transform. but if I right click on the transform and I split it, it'll zero out the location and rotation, and the scale will be uniform 1, which is exactly what I want, so I can then compile, and that'll work just fine. Now if I go back to the level, see there's nothing here, but if I push the space bar, you'll see the ball spawns out at random rotations. That appears to be working pretty good. Now the next thing we'll probably want to do is add in some bumpers or some walls, so it can't basically traverse on the on the up and down. So let's right click and create a new blueprint class. We'll do again of type actor, and maybe we'll call this BP underscore bumper or wall or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. Double click to open it up. I'm going to add a cube component, call it bumper wall. Drag this up, and then I'm going to select my emission material, and I'm just going to pop it into this, and then maybe I'll scale it on the Y by 100, and that's my wall. I'm going to compile, save, go back to my level, drag my bumper into the scene. I can reset the location by clicking this arrow right here, and there it is there. So now we need to get a placement. If we do maybe 1450, I think that looks about right. And then if you hold the Alt key and you click anywhere on these gizmos, it'll duplicate the object. Or you can just drag it in again, doesn't matter. And this one I will set at negative 1450 to be its counterpart. And if I play, you can kind of see that little line at the top and bottom. So when we actually spawn an object here, you can see it's bouncing pretty good. And that's working pretty all right. All right, let's go back into the ball object. If we look at the cube, we can go down to the constraints, and we can actually lock the Z position, right? Because this is it's a 3D engine, but we're trying to imitate a 2D game. So we're really only moving along the X and the Y. So we don't need a transition on the Z axis, so we might as well lock it. And then for the rotation, I don't really think we need to rotate it, so we can probably lock that down. And then if we compile, maybe we look to see how that plays. That looks pretty good. You can see we have some issues with how the script is handling the rotation though. And you don't have to use the script's method for moving the ball around. We could actually go back in the ball object, and another way we can do this is we can do it through the physics engine. So if we tell it to simulate physics, and then say we set the linear dampening to 0, we get rid of gravity, constraints are locked in, which actually I bet you those constraints only work when physics are enabled. And I think that should be everything we need. So let's compile and save. There is going to be an issue with this though, so let's go ahead and play. You'll notice because it's a physics engine, a lot of the momentum from the Pong ball is lost when it hits something. So we got to figure out a solution for that. And we can actually handle that through the material. So if we open up, like right now on the ball, we're using the emission material that we made in the previous video. So we can double click to open that up. And make sure the material is selected over here, so you have the details panel, but if you scroll down, look for physics. So we have a physics material slot, and Unreal comes with some defaults in there. You see we have ice, metal, cardboard, but we have rubber. And we do want a rubbery material because rubbery's bouncy. So if we save that, you can also hit this little folder icon to open it up, and then double click the rubber material. You will want the restitution to be a value of 1. That's basically how much it bounces, whether it's fully bounce with no loss. But you also want to make sure your friction is set to 0 as well. at least in this example, because we don't want any friction going through for the physics asset. Once you have that set, and then we actually play here, you'll notice it bounces without losing any momentum, kind of like how we had before. And because everything is sharing the same material, it's applying to all our objects. And because they're all like the same color, right? The classic game was, everything was basically just white in the black background, so this works fine for this project. Yeah, let's go ahead and, but okay. The next thing we should probably do is we should play some audio when the ball is kind of moving around, right? So let's go back into our content folder. Let's right click and create a new folder. Call this audio. Double click to open it up. And then I have two audio sources here. I have a bounce and a score. So I can drag those in. It basically just creates these little assets here. So we can basically play one when the player scores, play one when the Pong ball actually bounces. So let's actually go back to the ball blueprint, and we will go into the event graph. And we're going to create a custom event called score. And then when score happens, we will want to spawn sound 2D. And then the sound I want to play will be the score sound right here, this one. So we'll highlight that, and then I can just hit the little arrow so it loads it in. And then after I score, I want to destroy the actor. So the ball basically just gets, destroyed after it makes it into the goal, I guess, the goal, past the goalie. And then the other thing we want to do is anytime the ball is occluded or hit against something like the wall object or the Pong, or if you have multiple balls in play, if it hits another one of those objects, then maybe you want to play the sound. We can do that by selecting the ball static mesh here, right clicking and add an event, collision, and then you can do add on component hit. And then anytime it hits anything, you can just simply play a sound. And then the sound, we're going to select the bounce, and then I'll just hit the little arrow to load it in. And then that's pretty much done. Now the reason I use spawn 2D versus play sound 2D, on the score, I am destroying the actor. So if I were to use the play sound instead of the spawn sound, it would start to play the sound, and then as soon as it calls destroy actor, which is going to be pretty much instant, the sound would stop playing. So that's why we needed to call the spawn function. Another way you could do this, if for some reason you had to do play sound 2D and you couldn't do spawn, you just have to add a delay. So maybe you would get the static mesh and hide it, and then play the sound, and then you would delay for like 2 or 3 seconds, and then you would destroy the actor. That's another way you could get around that. Otherwise, you can just do spawn sound 2D, so it spawns a separate object, and then you can just call the destroy actor, and it will destroy this actor fine. But yeah, so now that we have this, now this is still not going to work on the bounce. So if we play here, you'll notice we are bouncing, and we are not getting any audio. And that has to do with physics. So if we select the ball object, remember we switched it to simulate physics. So when you do that, there is actually a collision setting for simulation generates hit events. You'll need to make sure that's checked. Otherwise, you will not be simulating any sounds when you hit it. So now we should get some various sounds here. Okay. So that's working pretty good. Now the next thing, if you wanted, this is kind of optional, but maybe don't want to see any hint of the bumpers or the wall objects, you can actually go back into the bumper object here, and then there is a hide object hidden in game. You can just check that, and And then that way it's kind of more like the classic where you don't see anything, but there's definitely something there hitting it back. That way it doesn't get lost. So maybe that looks more like the faithful classic Pong style that you're looking for. All right, and then we're almost done with this. The last thing we kind of need to do is the score. So we need a way to be able to track the actual score when the players are getting it past the paddle. And the way we can do that is just using a trigger box. So if I come to the add menu and I search for trigger, you get a bunch of different options. The one we can use is just a simple trigger box. And then I can scale that. Let's reset this to world origin. And then I believe I have to scale it on, yeah, be the X. So let's scale it by 100. And then what we can do is we just need to figure out where to place it. I think, let's try, this will be on the Y. So let's switch this to 2400. And then I can hold the Alt. Well, actually, before I do that, in the details outliner, you see it's just called trigger box. So for this one, I'm going to press F2, and then I'm going to call this one player 2 trigger goal. And the reason I called it player 2 is because it's this player's score. So when this player gets the ball over here, it's going to give them a score. So it's easier for us to tell them code. And then again, we can just hold the Alt key, drag out. It'll give us a second one, and then this one just basically has to be at the negative, I think, negative 2400. And then we will want to rename this one to player 1 trigger goal. So now we have a player 1 and a player 2 trigger goal. Now, you can do this code in a number of different ways. If you want to do it in its own blueprint, you can harvest it into a blueprint or create a blueprint object and do it that way. I'm just going to do it in the level blueprint just to make it easy. So you can come up here and do open level blueprint. And then we did the possess code here in the previous video. So we just find an empty spot, right click, and then we have references to the trigger goal because currently it is a selected or highlighted object. So I can create a reference, but I don't really need that. I need an event. So I will go to the collision events and I have begin overlap, which is perfect. That's really all I need. When I overlap with something, I want to cast to a blueprint. So what blueprint do you think we want to check? Obviously it should be the Pong ball, right? So we will cast to the ball, and then we're going to pass the other actor into the object check. If this is successful and it passes, then we can, as the ball blueprint, call some event. Now, if you'll remember, we created a custom event called score. So that's the one we want to call, right? So pull off the blue pin, search for that custom event we made called score, and that's it for player 1. So now we just need to repeat this for player 2. So we can go back to the level, we'll select player 2's goal basically, and then go back to the level, right click, add a custom event, collision, begin overlap, and then I'm just going to highlight, press Control D, duplicate, pass this in here, other actor in there, compile, save. Then we can go back and let's start testing some of this stuff out. So spawn a bunch of balls, and you can see it's playing the goal sound, and it's deleting the actor, which is perfect. So that's exactly what we're looking for. All right, good people, we'll cut it here, but in the next video, we'll work on creating our game manager to capture the player score and handle spawning. But I hope you found some informative value in this topic that you can take into your own projects. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.